A night when the wind howled like a mourning spirit. The small town of Raven Hollow lay quiet, almost too quiet. People whispered about the old mansion on the hill, a place where no one dared go after sunset. But tonight, I had no choice. I drove up the cracked road, my headlights cutting through the thick fog. The mansion loomed like a skeleton of forgotten memories. Its windows were dark, and the gates creaked as if warning me to stay away. As I stepped inside, smell hit me first. Damp wood, decay, and something I couldn't place. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Shadows danced along the walls. There was no one there, or so I thought. Suddenly, a whisper echoed through the hallway. "Why are you here?" it asked. I froze. The sound was soft but carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I followed the hallway, my footsteps echoing. The mansion seemed alive, breathing around me. Slammed somewhere above, though I saw no one. Every corner held a secret, and every shadow seemed to watch. Then in the grand parlor I saw it, an old portrait. A family, smiling. But their eyes were hollow, dark as night, and behind them, in the shadows, something moved. Something not quite human. I wanted to run, but my feet felt frozen. Grew colder, and a soft, almost sorrowful voice whispered again, "You shouldn't have come." And then the lights went out. The darkness pressed against me like a living thing. Hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, mingling with distant, unplaceable sounds. Something shuffled in the corners, but when I turned, nothing was there. I groped along the wall until I found a staircase. Each step groaned under my weight. The air grew colder as I ascended. A shadow flickered at the top, vanishing the moment I looked directly at it. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly ajar. From inside came a faint crying, a child's voice repeating, "Don't leave me." I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room was empty except for a rocking chair moving back and forth by itself. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, smelled of something metallic. A single candle flickered on a small table, casting long, grotesque shadows. Then I saw it, a small, pale handprint on the glass of the window, slowly upward as if someone invisible pressed against it from outside. The crying grew louder, closer, surrounding me. I stumbled back, tripping over something soft. Looking down, I saw a doll, old and broken, staring at me with eyes that seemed alive. The doll tilted its head and the whisper came again, "Stay forever." I ran. The hallway stretched endlessly before me. Doors I had passed earlier now opened on their own. From each room came murmurs, laughter, and cries, all overlapping in a symphony of madness. A door at the very end opened slowly. Behind it, a figure stood tall and cloaked in darkness. Its face was hidden, but I felt its gaze pierce my soul. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure extended a hand, and the shadows behind it surged forward, ready to consume me. I fell to the floor, gasping as the shadows closed in. The figure didn't move, but its presence weighed on me like a storm. My mind screamed to run, but my body refused. The whispers around me grew louder, forming words I could almost understand. "You cannot leave, not now." Suddenly a door slammed somewhere above, shaking the floor. The shadows recoiled for a brief moment, giving me a fleeting chance. I scrambled to my feet and bolted toward the staircase. Each step felt like I was climbing through a tunnel of darkness, walls pressing in on me from all sides. I reached the upper hallway where the portraits hung like silent sentinels. Their eyes seemed to follow me, now filled with anguish and warning. A cold hand brushed my shoulder. I spun around. No one was there, but a chilling laughter echoed in my ears. At the end of the hall, a large mirror reflected the room behind me. My reflection twisted and warped, smiling when I did not. Then it mouthed words I could hear in my mind. "You're mine." Panicking, I ran into a small bedroom. The bed was covered in dusty sheets. The mattress sank as if someone invisible sat upon it. A soft voice whispered from under the bed, "We've been waiting." I turned to leave, and the door slammed shut. The room grew darker, colder, the air thick with fear. I could hear scratching, as if claws dragged along the walls. The candle on the nightstand flickered violently, casting shadows that moved independently of anything real. And then I saw them, figures, children, pale and lifeless, surrounding me, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. They reached out, dragging me down into the floor, into the darkness that swallowed everything. I screamed, but no sound came. The shadows claimed me. And the last thing I saw was the reflection in the mirror, grinning back at me, whole and alive, while I was trapped behind the glass, forever part of the mansion's collection. The next morning, the town of Raven Hollow awoke to a quiet that felt heavier than usual. No one saw me leave the mansion. No one heard my screams, and yet something had changed. The mansion sat silently on the hill, its windows dark and foreboding, but now a faint light flickered from the grand parlor, as if someone, or something, had awakened within. The gates, creaking and broken, now stood open, inviting. Curiosity drew a small group of locals toward the mansion later that day. They laughed nervously, dismissing the stories as old wives' tales. But as they stepped inside, a chill wrapped around them like a cold hand, and the air seemed to whisper, Leave before it's too late. The hallways were empty, yet the portraits watched them with hollow eyes. One by one, each person felt a presence behind them, close enough to breathe, far enough to remain unseen. Soft crying echoed through the walls, fading into laughter that made their skin crawl. In the grand parlor, they found the mirror, intact, shining, but as they looked closer, one of them screamed. Behind their reflection stood a figure, tall, cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing faintly red. They turned. The room was empty. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. Doors slammed shut throughout the mansion, locking them inside. Whispers turned to chants, soft at first, deafening. Forever, forever, forever. The words drilled into their minds, paralyzing them with terror. One of them, braver, or perhaps more foolish, tried to leave. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around him, dragging him to the floor. His screams echoed, then vanished, leaving only silence. The others ran, but the mansion twisted around them, hallways shifting impossibly, stairs looping back on themselves. Outside, the town waited, oblivious. But the mansion had claimed new souls, and in the grand parlor, now held not just me, but dozens of trapped figures, all staring outward, silent witnesses to those who dared enter. Long ago, the mansion had belonged to the Blackwood family. Lineage whispered about in fear. They were said to have dabbled in things no human was meant to touch. Rituals that bound shadows to their will, feeding on fear, trapping souls for eternity. The townsfolk avoided the hill, but curiosity and greed often drew the unsuspecting inside. Remembered fragments, scraps of journals I had found hidden under the floorboards, pages yellowed with age. They spoke of experiments, of binding the living into mirrors, laughter that could bend the walls of reality. The last entry chilled me. The shadows hunger. Once they taste fear, they never release it. That night, through the mansion again, compelled by a force I could not resist. The halls were alive, shifting. Rooms I had seen before now held grotesque tableaux of previous victims. Dolls, broken toys, and human-like shadows hung in the corners, watching. I approached the grand parlor and the mirror. My reflection smiled wickedly, but then the glass rippled like water. From it, hands reached out, dragging faces, screaming silently. I realized then that the mirror was not a reflection. It was a prison, a gateway, a trap. The shadowed figure appeared behind me. Its voice was low, like a rumble from the depths. You seek to understand, but understanding is surrender. I tried to move. My feet sank into the floor. Whispers filled the room, overlapping. Stay, stay, stay. I screamed, thrashing, and the shadows pulled me toward the mirror. For a moment, I saw the other faces, screaming and pleading, caught forever. The figure leaned close, its hollow eyes boring into mine. Your fear feeds us. Your doubt sustains us. Ours now. And then the pull intensified. I felt my body stretch, dissolve, and collapse into the glass. My last sight was of my own reflection waving, smiling. As I became another trapped soul, the mansion exhaled, calm once more, waiting for the next curious visitor. Outside, Raven Hollow remained unaware, as shadows moved silently behind every corner, watching, always hungry. Weeks passed and the mansion on the hill remained silent and waiting, but the air around Raven Hollow grew heavier, tinged with a subtle dread that no one could name. People whispered of strange lights at night, of fleeting shadows in windows, and of a soft, sorrowful crying carried on the wind. A young man, drawn by stories and disbelief, climbed the hill one evening. He laughed nervously, mocking the legends, and pushed open the gates. Inside, the mansion greeted him with silence, then the smell of decay and something far older. The halls seemed endless, twisting unnaturally. He heard whispers, soft at first, then sharp, accusing. "Why are you here?" echoed from the walls, chilling his blood. Doors slammed shut behind him, trapping him in a corridor that should have led to the exit. In the grand parlor, waited. Its surface rippled, showing not just his reflection, but dozens of trapped faces, pale and pleading. And there, among them, he saw me, screaming silently. Trapped forever in the glass, the shadowed figure emerged, taller than any human, eyes glowing with a cruel light. It reached toward him, and the shadows surged. Panic consumed him. He ran. The mansion shifted with every step, hallways looping impossibly, doors opening to rooms that should not exist. He stumbled into a bedroom, the walls lined with old dolls, eyes following his every move. The whispering grew louder. "Stay forever with us." Hands reached from the floor, from the walls, from the mirror itself. He fought, screamed, but the darkness was endless, unyielding. The last thing he saw was his own reflection in the mirror, twisting, smiling, eyes hollow. And then, like all before him, he was pulled into the glass, another prisoner in the mansion's eternal collection. Outside, Raven Hollow slept unaware as the mansion exhaled, calm and patient. The shadows had grown, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to enter. And the legend of the Blackwood mansion continued, whispered from one fearful mouth to the next, ensuring the hunger of the shadows would never end.